guys, it's Nicole and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to repot this Bifoliate Cattleya orchid. It's redue for a repot. As you can see, it's got a bunch of roots hanging out and it's got a growth right over the pot. So I really got to get this done. I'm soaking it in some water to loosen up the root ball. And this one is the Bifoliate Cattleya Waianae Leopard Ching Hua. This one's a very beautiful Bifoliate Cattleya orchid. The blooms are just absolutely gorgeous. They have a velvet lip. It's a spotted orchid and the fragrance is fantastic. It's very strong and it's sort of like a sweet, spicy Cattleya fragrance that's just out of this world. So this orchid's going to be tricky because it's got a ton of roots. I repotted it last August of 2020 after it finished blooming. So this orchid blooms generally in the summer. Usually July or August is when I see blooms on this one. And although the pot is full of roots and it's really difficult for me to take it out of the pot, it struggled when I first repotted it last year. So this is a Bifoliate Cattleya. It's not a species, but it is kind of finicky. And when I repotted it last year, it actually dumped its old roots and just sulked for a few months actually. So knowing that, I'm going to try to be as careful as possible with this repot. I originally used a Repot Me mix of orchiata bark and perlite, and I also added some sphagnum moss in there to retain some moisture. So I'm just remembering what I did. I want to be very careful with the new roots. The old roots will probably die on me, so I'm going to assess the situation once I'm able to get it out of the pot and sort of see what's going on here. So bear with me as I try to get this orchid out of this 5-inch pot. It was originally in a 4-inch pot when I got it, so it's been growing a ton. And what I'm noticing is that what's causing this orchid not to come out is that there's some roots that grew through the bottom. I quickly inspected them and I noticed that the roots on the bottom were dead. So what I did to speed this up is I just went ahead and decided to cut those roots, because if not, I won't be able to get this orchid out of the pot and I was going to struggle a little bit more. So I just took those roots, as you could see them there. They're dead, they're squishy. I just cut them out to make my life easier. And then we're able to more easily remove this orchid from the pot. All right, that is much better. I just cut those roots off and the orchid is able to come out of the pot. So we've got a lot of roots going around this orchid. Now my priority is to make sure that the new roots are not damaged, because we don't want this to dump those roots again. And I remember what happened last year. So I am just loosening it up just a little bit. And as I'm looking at the roots on the bottom, you can see that there's some new roots. Those are the white ones. And then there's some like brownish roots. And I noticed that some of those died. It's basically swallowed up the medium, but you know, as I'm thinking about it and I'm repotting this, that orchiata bark and that perlite is actually still very good. It has not broken down, but what I need to do is get rid of any sphagnum moss that I have in there. So when I typically repot Cattleyas, I like to put sphagnum moss on the bottom so that when I'm pouring into its container, it can absorb some of the excess water on the bottom, and it could help me out if I'm on vacation or something like that. No surprise here. Some of those roots on the bottom have actually died because they were in that moss a little too long, but everything else looks good. And we want to get rid of that moss because it just breaks down much more quickly than the bark and the perlite. The perlite's usually fine. It doesn't break down, but the bark we need to be very careful with. So what I've decided as I'm working with this orchid is I'm going to keep the bark in there, but I'm going to prioritize getting all of this sphagnum moss out of the pot. And I'm going to speed this up so that we can get through the next steps of the repotting. As I was taking that moss off, I actually took a little whiff of the sphagnum moss to see if it actually broke down, and it actually did. It smelled a little bit sour to me. So again, sphagnum moss breaks down very quickly, and when it breaks down, it gets very acidic. And when you feed your orchids it can just get too acidic for it, and it's not ideal for feeding or for the roots. So I just want to make sure I prioritize getting all that moss that I put on the bottom out. I did add some moss throughout the orchid as well, but it was very small pieces around it. So I'm looking for those pieces, and then I'm just going to repot it into a larger container. And this is me just wanting to be more conservative with this orchid. It still has quite a lot of very good quality orchiata bark in there, and I think it's a waste to just mess with that root ball. So I think this is good enough for now. So basically what I've done here is I've got a 6-inch orchid clay pot, and I'm not going to be transitioning this to Leca because then that would need a completely thorough cleaning, which I don't want to do with this finicky orchid. And what I'm doing is I am pushing the oldest growths to the edge of the pot as much as possible and making sure that there's some room for those new roots. So I want to be able to grow this orchid for as long as I can, and I'm going to fill around the pot with some coconut husk. Now, if I had some orchiata bark or the same mix that I got from Repot Me, I would be filling it with that. But since this is all that I have on hand, I think it's totally fine to pot around the orchid with this medium. Now, this is a more moisture retentive medium, which is fine because this is clay, and clay is very wicking. So it'll make sure that this coconut husk actually dries more quickly. So I'm not concerned with that at all. And I think it's perfectly fine to mix and match the different mediums that you use. Now this is, I'm using coconut husk, and I'm also using some charcoal in the mix as well. And I'm just basically filling around the orchid. Now you'll see that I had this at the edge of the pot, and I accidentally moved it a little bit over, and I didn't notice. So it could be that I might have to repot this sooner or divide it or something like that, but that was just an oversight on my part as I was repotting. When you're repotting an orchid like this, you always want to make sure that it's at the absolute edge of the pot to give you as much room as possible. So I'm going through filling around, making sure that there's medium all around this orchid. And I'm not too concerned with the old medium because it was high quality medium. Now, if it was in 100% moss, then that would be a different story. And that's actually much more easy to remove than pieces of bark. But I'm just up potting it. I'm making my life easier with this one. And I've repotted it before. It's very difficult with to transition this one into anything new. So I know from experience that if I take off and remove all of that medium, it's going to sulk all winter. So my hope is that by potting it this way, I'm able to preserve those roots, and then it can grow some new growths, and then everything will be okay. Now, again, I regret not potting it all the way at the other edge. I think I was off by maybe 2 centimeters, and it would have made the difference between an extra growth or not. But I think we have room for 1 or 2 more growths. Hopefully they don't go over the pot right away. And I'm just tucking in that husk with a little stick here just to make sure that there's no huge, enormous air gaps. Like, we do want air gaps, but this is in a clay pot that'll dry relatively quickly. And we just want everything to be nice and snug in there. This repotting is all set, so I saved the old roots by up-potting it into a larger pot and maintaining the original medium, except for the sphagnum moss, which breaks down. My biggest mistake here was not pushing it to the edge of the pot more. I could have saved some room, but that's okay. This orchid should grow nicely from here. Its blooms are absolutely gorgeous, so I can't wait to see this grow. Well, anyway, guys, if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more orchid content. Take care, everyone. Bye.